6C. Reading with sounds. The Ladybird Keywords Reading Scheme. A. Apple. B. Ball. C. Cat. D. Dog. Egg. F. Fish. G. Girl. H. Hat. I. Ink. L. Leg. M. Man. N. Net. O. Orange. S. Sun. T. Two. U. Umbrella. Here is a pig. P. Here is a pen. You make the P sound when you start to say pen. Here is a pencil. P. Here is a picture. P. Here is a rabbit. R. Here is some red. You make the R sound when you start to say red. Here is a road. Here is a room. You make the sound when you start to say room. Here is some water. I can say water. It starts with W. Here is a woman. I can say woman. It starts with W. Here is a window. I can say window. It starts with W. Here is a wall. I can say wall. It starts with W. This is some jam. You can say jam. It starts with J. This is some jelly. You can say jelly. It starts with J. This is a jug. You can say jug. It starts with J. This is a jar. You can say jar. It starts with J. Pot. Rug. Wet. Jar. Rag. Jam. Wall. Egg. Peg. You can read all the words when you make the sounds. It is a jar. It is a jar of jam. He has a rag. It is a red rag. He is at the top. He stops at the top. The cat is on the rug. It is a red rug. She gets a pot. She puts jam in the pot. The dog is wet. He rubs the dog. She gets the ham. She puts ham in the pan. She has pegs. She has lots of pegs. We see a key. We can say key. It starts with K. We see a kettle. We can say kettle. It starts with K. We see a king. We can say king. It starts with K. We see a kitten. We can say kitten. It starts with K. Look at the van. You say van. It starts with V. Look at the vase. You say vase. It starts with V. Look at the vine. You say vine. It starts with V. Look at the violin. You say violin. It starts with V. X as in box. X as in fox. Y for yellow, Z for zebra, and Z for zoo. Complete the words as you write them in your exercise book. The pictures will help you. Pig, pig. Tin. Cat. Car. Egg, peg. Pen. Rug. Mug. Up, top. Pot. Q for quarter. Here is a quarter. Q for queen. Here is a queen. Q for quill. Here is a quill. Grandfather and grandmother write to say that they want to go away to the sea. They want Dad and the children to look after their dog, their house, and their garden when they are away. Mom reads the letter to Peter and Jane. Jane says, "Good, I want to look after the house." Peter says, "Yes, it will be fun. I will take the dog out every day, and we can all look after the garden." "Let us write a letter to grandmother and grandfather," says Jane. "Yes," says Peter, "we will do it now." Copy out and complete. Mom reads to Peter and Jane. Grandfather and grandmother want to go away. Peter and Jane will help. Peter says, "Yes, I want to do it." The children write to their grandmother and grandfather. Jane has a pencil and she writes down the words. Mom and Peter help her. They tell Jane what to write. Jane writes, "Dear grandmother and grandfather, thank you for your letter. We will look after your house and garden when you are at the sea. We like to help you very much. We will take the dog out every day for a walk, and we will look after the birds and flowers. Have a good time at the sea. Love from Jane and Peter." Copy out and complete. They want to write. Jane has a pencil. They like to help very much. We will take the dog out. Peter's father takes his own father and mother to the station by car. Peter and Jane are with them. The children are going to see their grandmother and grandfather off. At the station, Peter and his sister help grandmother and grandfather out of the car. Dad has the bags. They find the train in the station. Soon, grandfather and grandmother are in the train. "Look after each other," says Dad. "Yes, we will, says grandfather. "Have a good time," say the children. Then the train pulls out of the station. Copy out and complete. Peter's father has a car. Dad has the bags. Peter and Jane look at the train. The children are not in the train. Here are Dad, Peter, and Jane at grandfather's house. They have come by car. Jane has her baby doll Anne with her today. They go into the house. They have been here lots of times before. The children like to come to this house. They love their grandfather and grandmother very much. Soon, they start to work. Jane does the work in the house, and Peter and his father go into the garden. Peter looks for grandfather's dog. He wants to take him for a walk. Copy out and complete. They are at their grandfather's house. They go into the house. Soon they start to work. Peter looks for the dog. Peter is out with the dog. He takes him where he can run about. It is a very hot day. Peter finds it best to walk under the trees because it is not so hot there. The trees are by the water. Peter sits on a wall by the water. He looks at some other boys as they play with the ball. One of the boys lets the ball go into the water. Peter tells the dog to go into the water. The dog jumps in and gets the ball for the boys. Copy out and complete. The dog likes to run. The boy lets the ball go into the water. The dog can get the ball. He jumps in for the ball. Peter and his father are in grandfather's garden. Pat is with them. Jane is with an old friend of her grandmother who lives next door. This friend is going to let her have some eggs. Peter's father has work to do. Peter helps him, and then he has a game with the dog. The dog likes to jump for a ball and to run after it. It is not so hot now. There is some water in the garden. Soon Peter lets the ball go into the water. I will get it, he says. Copy out and complete. Jane has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eggs. The dog runs and jumps. It is not so hot now. Look, says Peter, the ball is in the water. Jane comes out of the house into the garden. She sees that the ball is in the water and that Peter is going to get it. Don't get wet, Peter, she says. But Peter is soon in the water. Help me, he says. Help me, Dad. Help me, Jane. I am in the water. Help me to get out. Then the dog jumps into the water. He wants to play with Peter. Dad and Jane run to pull Peter out of the water. They get him out, but he is very wet. Copy out and complete. Dad works in the garden. Help me, Jane, says Peter. The dog sees Peter in the water. Peter is very wet. Jane is in the garden. She can see some birds as they fly round the trees. She knows that her grandmother and grandfather love birds. Grandmother gives them something to eat every day, Jane says. They look as if they want to eat now. I must get something for them. She gets some cake and puts it out for the birds. Soon they come down to eat it. Jane looks at the birds as they eat the cake. Then she gets some flowers from the garden for the friend who lives next door. Copy out and complete. Jane is in the garden. She looks at the birds. She looks at the birds as they fly around the trees. Jane gets some cake for the birds. The birds eat the cake. Grandmother and grandfather have come home today. They have had a good time by the sea. Here is grandmother with Jane. She takes off her hat and as she sits down to have some tea and talk to Jane. Jane tells her about the house, the garden, the dog, and the birds. She says that grandmother's friend next door gave them some eggs. Then Jane talks about her own friends. She tells grandmother about Mr. and Mrs. Green, Bob, Mary, and Molly about Pam, and about old Tom who lives by the sea. Copy out incomplete. Grandmother takes off her hat. They have had a good time. Jane talks about Pam and Bob. Jane talks about old Tom. Grandfather thanks the children for the help they gave when he was away. He says he will take them to the zoo. Off they go the next day. Grandfather has no car, so they go by train. At the zoo, they walk around for some time, and then they have something to eat. Then Peter says, "I want to go on the elephant." Here he is on the elephant. Jane looks at an ostrich. "What a big bird," she says. The children have a good time at the zoo, and then they go home. They thank grandfather very much. Copy out and complete. Peter and Jane go to the zoo. The children like the zoo. Peter gets up on the elephant. They thank grandfather very much.